All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Town of Hilton Island Gullah Geechee Land and Cultural Preservation Task Force meeting. This is March the 7th, 2022. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. We welcome members of our task force, our town staff, and I notice we do have a couple of our council members present as well. We welcome them and thank you for taking the time, and certainly most importantly, our public. Teresa, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay, would you please go ahead and call the roll for me?
Certainly. Mr. Abdul Malik,
Present.
Mr. Campbell,
Present.
Ms. Green,
Present.
Mr. Hens,
I'm here.
Mr. Stevens,
Present.
and Mr. Simmons is expected to join us soon.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Teresa, and thank the members of the task force for making an effort to be here. I believe we might have a full house for what we have. I want to acknowledge that I found out that Jamie Lobko, who worked with our staff for so many years, and at the beginning of the creation of this task force for cultural preservation, will be leaving the staff soon and to take on another opportunity. We hope to have her in our next meeting, but I wanted to acknowledge publicly our thanks and gratitude for all the work that Jamie has put in to this community on this particular project and so many others. We're happy for her, but she will be dearly missed for her expertise and professionalism and the contribution she's made to this community. So Jamie Lobko, we hope to have her with our next meeting, but we thank you publicly now. Okay, there is an agenda that has been sent out, and at this time, I need to have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, great. Do we do this by raising our hands or do we need to call the roll?
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to call the roll.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Abdul Malik,
I support.
Mr. Campbell,
Approve.
Ms. Green,
Approve.
Mr. Hens,
I'm good.
Mr. Stevens.
Approved.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, great, thank you. The next on our agenda, we have the approval of the minutes. This is from the regular meeting of January the 3rd, 2022. May I have a motion to approve these minutes unless there are some observations or revisions?
So
Y'all let
moved.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. There a second?
Second.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, now Teresa, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Abdul Malik,
I support.
Mr. Campbell,
Approve.
Ms. Green,
Approve.
Mr. Hens,
Approved.
Mr. Stevens.
Approved.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Next, I have the regular meeting from February the 7th. These are the minutes from this February 7th meeting as well. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the February 7th meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I was in it.
Okay, thank you. Teresa, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Abdul Malik,
I support.
Mr. Campbell,
Approve.
Ms. Green,
Approve.
Mr. Hens,
Approve.
Mr. Stevens.
Approved.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you so much. Okay, next we have citizen comments. Teresa, do we have any citizen comments?
Mr. Chairman, we do not have any public comments at this time. I would like to note that public comments concerning the agenda items were to be submitted electronically via the town's open town hall portal. The public comment period closed at noon today, and there were no comments of record. In addition to submitting comments on the portal, citizens were provided the option to call into the meeting to give comments by phone. However, we have no callers for this meeting. Thank you.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you, Teresa. The next item we have is a discussion item, and it is the Historic Stoney Neighborhood Economic Development Corporation. And I believe we have Josh Gruber, our Deputy Town Manager. Josh Gruber, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I'll just kind of jump right in for discussion today. We wanted to give you an update on an item that's recently come before Town Council. That way you're kind of familiar with what's going on with this particular item. If it's all right with you, I will go ahead and attempt to share my screen here. That way we can go over. All right, are you able to see the staff report memo?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So at the town council meeting on February 15th, the council took up an item which was the formation of a historic Stoney Neighborhood Economic Development Corporation. This was an item that was identified in the town's adopted strategic plan. Originally, we had intended to bring this item up in the fiscal year 23 timeframe. So beginning sometime after July, August timeframe is when we had initially intended to bring this forward. But due to some information that we were provided and some potential opportunities that we might be able to take advantage of, we were requested to accelerate this particular item and go ahead and begin putting it into place to see if we can get it created. And essentially what took place at the town council meeting was a resolution was introduced that, when approved, would authorize staff to begin the process that's necessary to create a separate nonprofit entity whose mission generally at this point would be to assist property owners, businesses, and other people within the historic Stoney neighborhood community. And as you can see in the staff report here, we outlined a number of areas that we believe this organization will ultimately be focused on once it's created. And those include the promotion of cultural resources, the protection of cultural assets, neighborhood sustainability, quality of life enhancements, entrepreneurialism, business attraction, expansion and retention, land planning, development assistance, and providing financial opportunities. Now, obviously, a number of these things go beyond what would be thought of as being traditional functions of an economic development corporation. And for that reason, following the adoption of the resolution, we've actually begun calling this a community development corporation because the scope, at least as we believe it will ultimately be approved, is likely to be beyond just economic development functions. So where we are at in process is the first step was having town council review and approve the resolution to authorize the town manager to prepare the documents that are necessary to create this organization. So similar to creating either nonprofit or for-profit corporations, typically begin is by drafting and filing of articles of incorporation. So this is the legal document that outlines what the corporate entity is and how it is going to exist once it is submitted to the state or federal governmental bodies. And so at this point, step A has been completed. Town council approved the resolution that was presented to them at the February 15th meeting. And subsequent to that, staff has begun working with experts in this area. And if any of you had an opportunity to either attend or view the town council meeting that occurred on February 15th, we had asked Franny Heiser, and Franny is a local attorney who has been working first with the McNair law firm, now known as the Burr Foreman law firm, but one of the largest law firms in the state of South Carolina, and somebody who has worked with the town since the town's incorporation. Her firm and her areas of expertise include bond counsel work, as well as assisting entities like economic development corporations and community development corporations to become operational. So we asked her to come in as an expert in this area and to speak to both the public and to town council. And we are ultimately working with her to pursue the creation of the documents that are referenced in this staff plan, particularly the articles of incorporation and the bylaws for the corporation itself. The next step, once those are completed, we plan on bringing this back before town council for review of those draft documents. And at that point, we'll seek authorization to proceed with filing them. In this case, the articles of incorporation would be filed with the South Carolina Secretary of State's office. They're the ones that are charged with receiving these documents, reviewing them as to the form of the documents, and ultimately approving them. And once approved, that organization would then exist as a separate legal entity. We will also be working with developing the bylaws. Within the bylaws, it will articulate how the organization will ultimately be governed. This will likely be done through a series of functions. One, this will be an organization that will be tied to the town and ultimately supported by the town, but will need a board of directors to provide advice and guidance on the operations and functions of the corporation. So within the bylaws, we will outline the makeup of the board of directors, how many positions will serve on the board, and what the role of those individuals will be in supporting this organization. And then once the board of directors is appointed, we would then move to create a business plan and annual budget outlining the actual operations of the organization itself. And so you see, this is where we are at now, which is the actual drafting of the documents. Once completed, we're going to go on to step C, which is bringing them back for consideration. And then if approved, when they are presented to town council, we will then move with actually organizing the corporation and appointing its board of directors. And so that is kind of the current status of where we are at with this particular area. I'm going to try to also share with you a copy of the resolution that was approved. And so you see here, the resolution number is to be filled in once we know what number this is going to fall in terms of our category system. But at this point, the resolution has been signed by the mayor. It has been officially entered into our rolls and sets forth the fact that staff is authorized to begin taking these steps to prepare the legal documents for discussion as I kind of outlined. So with that, that kind of gives a very general overview of where we are at with this particular matter. I will say that while we know kind of where we are headed in terms of the process, because strictly speaking, it's a function of a legal process that you have to go to create a corporation. The ultimate functioning of the organization itself is still being defined as we continue to move this forward. We know that this organization is certainly an outgrowth of the impacts to this particular neighborhood that we are seeing and are anticipating as a result of the US 278 corridor project. And so we want to be timely in terms of moving this forward so that any mitigation activities that this organization can help with in terms of supporting that community through these different initiatives, that the organization will exist, it will be functional, and will be in place prior to any actual commencement of work with the 278 corridor project. And Mr. Chairman, that hopefully at least summarizes kind of initially what the actions are that have occurred to date, what our intentions are kind of in moving this forward. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you or the task force may have on this item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gruber. I'll start with the order that I have in front of me. Mr. Malik, do you have any questions or comments for Mr. Gruber in the presentation?
Maybe just one question, just in a nutshell. how will this particular effort benefit local Gullah natives economically?
Well, one of the things that we kind of look at is how they can support existing businesses that are in this particular area, but also how can we help create new economic opportunities. In terms of specific, this business is going to go onto this parcel and it's going to perform this function. I don't have any specifics for you today, but the goal of this organization is to help identify what opportunities already exist and what opportunities there are to create new economic mechanisms and opportunities for the historic Gullah community.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malik. I do see that we now have Mr. Simmons on the phone. I'm not sure how much of that you heard, but I would ask if you have any questions for Mr. Gruber. Palmer Simmons. Palmer, are you there?
All right.
There he is.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We can hear you now.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I only heard the very tail end of, I guess you said it was Mr. Gruber explaining some of the plans for economic growth in our neighborhoods.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I only hold the very.
Just to kind of summarize for you, the town is undertaking actions to create a Stoney Neighborhood Community Development Corporation. This would be a separate nonprofit entity whose charge will be to look at a variety of different ways to preserve and protect the community and also create and sustain economic options and opportunities within that neighborhood as well.
Okay. That's in progress. No, I guess trying to find the right word. Any layout or plan for what those opportunities, what specifically you're going to work toward? Any specifics on that?
At this point, there are no specifics. We are early on in this process with just standing up the organization itself. So we're in the process of drafting the articles of incorporation and then the corporation's bylaws. The rubber is going to meet the road on this once we have a board of directors that are in place, and the board's going to be able to help kind of identify what are the opportunities and things that they want to try to pursue in this regard, because that's going to then impact the business plan that they're going to put together and ultimately the budget that they'll be looking to establish for the organization as well, because if you don't have the resources, you can't accomplish the goals that are out.
Right. Okay. All right. I would have no further questions at this point. Mr. Chairman, thank you, Judge. No further questions at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Simmons. And as Josh Gruber is saying, this is pretty early on in the process. Shawnee,
Okay.
Green, Ms. Green, you have any questions or comments? Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I do. Do we have any ideas on who the board will consist of or the makeup of the board for this?
So the makeup is still being discussed in terms of the number of seats to the board. We know that there's likely to be some town council representation on the board, and then we also need to get not only individuals from this community, but also professionals that will be necessary to help perform functions. So, for example, finding financing opportunities for businesses in this area. So to have somebody from the financial markets or have somebody from the banking system or something like that, having somebody potentially from the Realtors Association or somebody who's in that type of business. So ultimately what you see with these is a group of professionals who use their knowledge together to help be able to accomplish some of the goals and objectives that are outlined for the organization itself. So there are no specific names at this point. There are no kind of defined positions, but I can tell you generally what the conversations have been is looking to identify professionals that are on the island that would be necessary in order to ensure the success of the corporation in terms of its economic and community development endeavors.
Okay, and I hear you. The reason why I'm asking with the board, I noticed that you kind of put out professionals a lot, and if we're talking about the economic preservation and protecting, will there be any room for others, like from the community, from the Gullah community? My concern is, just when you're talking about planning and businesses that will, benefit the people in the neighborhood, and, to make sure there's opportunity for Gullah businesses and everything. Town council, professionals, the banks and everything. I just have like a little concern a little bit, if I may.
Sure, absolutely. And I would tell you at this point, there absolutely are opportunities. I think to have people from the community involved as well. Generally speaking, and again, this is going to start to come together in clearer detail as these discussions go forward, because we are so early on at this point. But in order to be successful, you're going to need some representation from a lot of different areas. So obviously the community itself, but then also some of these other professionals that are going to help provide that information so that those businesses that are in the community can be successful.
Okay. And I think Palmer touched on plans that you have. So basically there aren't any plans set in stone, just kind of like a layout of what the committee would do, but there's nothing in mind yet or plans that are already set for what they're going to hit on. I'm just kind of, just based on being on the task force, we kind of had an outline, some low-hanging fruit and everything before we came forth and said, this is the committee that, and what we want to work on.
Absolutely. And to that high level in terms of what we want the group to focus on, we've outlined kind of in the resolution itself. And what it says is that the organization would foster and promote economic growth by focusing on the core areas of cultural protection, quality of life enhancements, entrepreneurialism, business attraction, things like that. But obviously those are very broad statements in terms of what activities could actually fall under any of those categories. And so we know very broadly what it is that we want this organization to do, but when it comes down to specific activities, that's where creating that business plan is going to become important, because that's going to then outline how they're going to go about kind of accomplishing those broad goals that are stated in the resolution.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Green. And Josh, you had mentioned that there would be a series of meetings and stuff like that where we'll have opportunities to give some input from the community and certainly from the task force, right?
Yes, sir. I think that's a very important thing to highlight at this point. We've had the first meeting, which is where we received authorization to begin drafting the documents. But the plan is to bring those back for additional discussion with town council. And before they're actually adopted or before we're given authorization to file them, there'll be an opportunity to review them, to understand what they state, what they don't state. I will kind of give you a heads up. When it comes to articles of incorporation, I don't know if any of you have seen them directly. A lot of times articles of incorporation are fairly high level documents. It just basically talks about generally what the purpose of the organization is going to be, and then it has some legal language with regards to how it will be existing as a separate entity. But the bylaws of the organization will certainly outline in a little bit greater detail what the goals of the organization are, what it wants to accomplish. And then as we work at creating those additional documents, specifically with regards to the business plan and the budget, that's where you're really going to start getting some more finer detail about what are the things that this organization is going to try to do in terms of impacting the community.
Okay, just want to interject that. Mr. Campbell.
The only question I have at this point is, do you have any idea when they're going to start taking applications to see for the makeup of the board and the board members?
You know, at this point, I would encourage folks, if you have an interest, if you know of anybody who might be interested, to go ahead and send us that information. Again, and until the bylaws are kind of outlined and adopted, we won't know how many positions we are looking to put on a board of directors. But we should already be starting the process to identify those individuals who may be interested, or individuals who may be necessary in order to ensure the success of the corporation itself. So I would say there's no time like today in terms of starting to go ahead and forward that information to us, so that as it becomes clear how many spots we're looking to fill, we can look at reaching out to those individuals in terms of seeking their assistance in this body.
Okay, and who do we forward that information to?
At this point, if you want to forward it to Sharice, I'm sure she'd be able to kind of collect everything, or you can also send it to myself. I'm kind of working from the legal standpoint of making sure that the documents get prepared and filed, and then ultimately at a certain point, we'll be able to kind of hand that over to potentially somebody within the corporation itself. Again, that's one of the things that I think is going to be a part of future discussions are, you know, how is this organization going to operate? If you want it to be successful, you're likely to need an executive director, or at least some kind of potentially dedicated either full-time or part-time staff. And once that starts to come together, that will likely be kind of a point of contact for them. But I think we're a ways away from getting there. So if you want to send it to either Sharice or myself, we'll be happy to go ahead and kind of keep it as part of this packet as it moves forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Campbell. Mr. Hintz.
Yeah, Josh, you just alluded to my first question. So in all likelihood, perhaps this board would hire an executive director to carry out the wishes of the board, or is that, you mentioned this was a partnership with the town? Would the town be responsible for carrying out the wishes of the board?
So I think the corporation will ultimately be responsible to the town. We're kind of somewhat modeling this off to the Don Ryan Center that exists in Bluffton. And so that is controlled by the town, but it has a board of directors who ultimately advises on the operations of the organization.
And a director.
And a director, and that's it. And so we think it's very likely that that's part of the conversation. Obviously, we won't know until we get to that point. But we certainly think it would be very realistic to expect that as part of what the board of directors suggests is some kind of professional management of the corporation itself.
And then the town has money that it can set aside for a budget.
And that's going to have to be part of the discussions. So in terms of building the business plan, that's going to impact what the budget request is, but that's why you also have the town council involved in those discussions, because that's where that request will ultimately come back to.
Okay. My other question, just out of curiosity, do we know how many businesses are currently licensed in the Stoney neighborhood?
That's a great question. I don't know that I know the answer to that off the top of my head. I certainly know just from general knowledge that there are businesses that exist in that corridor and exist in those neighborhoods, but to quantify the number of businesses, I don't have that with me today.
Yeah, it might be interesting, maybe Sharice, if you could get us a list of all of the businesses currently there, so we'll know the starting point. Hopefully, when this Community Development Corp is through, that number will be enhanced. So that I would like to know that information if we can get that.
Sure, I can do that.
Great. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hintz. And all of you have kind of touched on probably some of the same questions that I would have. Let me just start with the first couple of comments and observations about the makeup and the dynamics of the board, and certainly the opportunity that we all will have to give some input. I'm certainly in agreement that we need great professionals, we want to get the best minds that we can to work on an effort like this. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that the folks that are involved, if they're not local for sure, we want them to be familiar with the culture as it is, and even on how businesses operate. To answer your question, Mr. Hintz, there are definitely businesses in the Stoney district for sure. When we say businesses, we have to understand, again, culturally, how those businesses operate. They may be landscapers, they may be hairdressers, they may be things that have been in existence on this island long before there was a town of Hilton there. But it's kind of the way we do business. So yes, there are legitimate business owners, trucking, transportation. There are business owners, and those are the kinds of things that I'm hoping our professionals will be able to take a look at and understand how sensitive it may be to enhance those businesses and find ways, creative ways to help them thrive and survive. So that would be my first comment and observation. Josh, that's not necessarily a question. And I think that from what you've said, we have an opportunity and we're moving in that direction. The other question that I have is that this, as you have described it, is an effort that is a historic Stoney neighborhood economic development corporation. Are we talking about all the neighborhoods? Or are we just talking about the one that's in Stoney, and there's an opportunity to expand at some point?
That's exactly correct. At this point, our primary focus is going to be on the Stoney neighborhood, primarily because of the impacts from the 278 project. But as this organization matures over time, its scope may enlarge to cover other neighborhoods of the island as well. So that's certainly something that could be in play in the future. But for right now, initially, the biggest need that we see is getting it stood up and in place to kind of help mitigate some of the impacts from that particular project.
Yeah, and I think that in relation to some of the other topics that we've had on our recommendations, such as the overlay district, those that may come in handy and start trying to identify those areas and those businesses that we can support and help to thrive and survive. So hopefully all of this will still be very relevant. And as Ms. Green said, we have an opportunity to give some input, and we look forward to being able to support this effort. I think it's great that we have something like this coming for us. I guess, and the last part of this is maybe not a question either, but I'm hoping that it's very obvious that as this develops and when it comes to fruition, there will be ways to make sure that the community knows about this. The awareness, the public awareness of it, and the education piece of it. So we know what it is, how it operates. And again, I'm speaking culturally, that it is, we feel like it's approachable. When we say we got a lot of high level professionals, a lot of times we may not feel like we can approach, but we want to make sure we get this out into the places that we're trying to help.
Yes, sir. We agree with that 100%. We've been working to try to get information out. Once council did, in fact, approve this, we issued a press release to all of our normal communications platforms. I know I myself have done a couple of both print interviews and media interviews in an effort to try to get this information out. Now, the limitation is we're still so early on in this that a lot of people want to have more details about what is it that you're going to do, just like we kind of discussed here today. And that's very understandable. But we will get there. And the fact that we're getting this started now and it is moving forward means that we are headed in the right direction. But we will continue to try to broadcast the message about this action and the opportunities that it will ultimately present as we go forward.
Yeah. The last thing just one more thing. The last thing I would say that I know at one time, maybe a couple of years ago, there was a booklet of businesses that are within the Gullah community here. So there is some information out there, and that was from years and years ago. But that, as was mentioned before, that kind of data and information is very important to us. I believe, Mr. Hintz, as you said previously, we want to see where we are with not only the businesses, but certainly with how people are using their property, if we are in fact making some progress or if we are losing ground and what those trends may be. I think it's also important to understand the different dynamics or challenges people may be having when it comes to either developing their property or dividing it so that they can pass it on. So the data, the case studies will continue to be important, and we'll be looking to Dr. DeBose to kind of help us with gathering that data and putting that information out there for us. Mr. Malik, I believe you had your hand up. If there's something else you wanted to add or ask.
Yeah, I do have a question. Let's pose a scenario where, let's say in Stoney, there's a potential landowner that may want to sell their land. With this new effort, would there be any potential that instead of that landowner selling their land, that they could perhaps enter into some kind of partnership with the town for development of that land and they can retain it?
At this point, I think there's a lot of options that are potentially available. And so that certainly could be one. What I would say generally at this point, the goal is to help preserve and protect this community. And one of the ways that we think it's important to do that is by creating economic opportunities, both for the citizens that are there and for future generations that are going to be coming behind them. And so, you know, to answer your question, I think that's certainly a possibility. It's something that we would want to take a look at a little bit more with the board of directors and with this corporation to figure out what the goals are that are trying to be accomplished and how we could potentially support that. But as long as it meets that objective of trying to preserve and protect the heritage and the culture of this community, I think it's certainly something that's on the table.
And then would that necessarily translate into the town of Hilton Head not being necessarily the first in line to purchase land from a native owner in that area?
Yeah, I mean, again, the corporation would be looking to do whatever activities they can to meet their objectives of supporting economic activities within that area. And so if what you're proposing falls underneath that definition, then I certainly think that that's possible, because that's what the purpose of that organization is going to be to accomplish.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Those are all good questions. And yes, we know this is early on in the process, and we want to know now what this thing is going to look like and feel like already. But I think it's exciting that this effort has come forth. Mr. Gruber, we thank you for taking the time to spend a few minutes with us, and we hope that you'll be able to come back and give us a little bit more as this goes on. Again, if we have any questions or if you have any ideas about people that might be good to the board of directors, who can reach out to Dr. DeBose or certainly to Mr. Gruber, I'm sure. Okay, great. Thank you, Josh. The next item I have on the agenda is the staff report. Dr. DeBose.
Yes, good afternoon. First, I would like to appreciate the comments that were made about my colleague, Jamie Locko. She's been instrumental in helping me transition into this position, and so I will personally miss her greatly. The first thing I want to talk about today is the Historic Overlay District. The task force has asked for updates on the proposed Historic Overlay District. The amendments for this district was drafted in early 2020 and was presented to the Gullah Task Force, the LMO Committee, and the Planning Commission also in 2020. Throughout this process, some concerns were raised about the proposed density increases, the size of the proposed area, and the home occupation amendments. Therefore, the Public Planning Committee went ahead and recommended that the family compound and family subdivision amendments move forward first, rather than to stall the entire process. And those amendments were passed in July 2021. And this was a first big step, and staff would like to focus on in the immediate streamlining what is required for the development plan review for those applications, as well as other challenges that we find as we receive more applications. The work on the overlay will resume after the island-wide capacity trends and assessment has been completed, and that's over a long-term goal. And staff has already begun initial meetings with the consultant to determine aspects the study needs to address. And the task force will be updated as the study progresses. It is likely that the framework of the proposed overlay will be reworked to address some of the needs of the property owners in historic neighborhoods. And staff will work with the code writer to address the density issues, the study area, and the other elements. The important aspect of the Historic Neighborhoods Permitting and Design Studio helps us focus on the immediate concerns that will help us focus that towards the overlay. And those are the challenges that property owners face. And the proposed overlay should address those challenges. Access to property and addressing are the #1 issues that staff is currently faced with. Specifically, parcels that are landlocked and cannot be accessed properly. We'd like to take a closer look on how to address that. Access that is not within the platted easement or the easement is not legally recorded. Discovering that the address numbers are out of sequence when property owners try to build or place another home. And understanding these challenges up close helps staff determine that the elements for the overlay need to focus on the long-term solutions and benefits to the property owners that are in the historic neighborhoods. And as stated earlier, staff will continue to provide the updates on the overlay district on a monthly basis. Secondly, the Wills Clinic, the Links Incorporated is working with the Center for Heirs Property Preservation to sponsor a drive through Wills Clinic at Queen Chapel AME on March 12th, which is this Saturday. People need to call the number on the flyer to schedule an appointment to draft a simple will by March 4th. It said that on the flyer. However, if there are people who are still interested in drafting a simple will, the Center for Heirs Property Preservation will take phone calls no later than noon tomorrow. So you still have opportunity to schedule an appointment, but you need to act quickly because there are only 4 appointments left. The lawyers for the Center for Heirs Property Preservation will not draft the will on site on Saturday, but they are asking people to come and sign the will in front of witnesses. So that's what the event will be on Saturday. We had 2 community education programs. Staff worked with the Heritage Library to host those in February. One was at Queen Chapel AME and the other at the Coastal Discovery Museum. We've had positive feedback from both events, and it was a great way to share the services that are provided by the Heritage Library Genealogy Clinic. There's also an heirs property forestry seminar on March 29th at the Rotary Center at Arthur Fraser Park, that's in Bluffton. You were sent a flyer for this event on February 23rd. And so if you have not done so, please share that information with the community because a minimum of 25 participants are needed in order for the program to take place. And finally, the Palmetto Breeze Airport Survey is, the Palmetto Breeze is working on expanding their services to the airport and other areas. And so they're looking for community input. On February 23rd, you were sent a survey, which was set to close on March 7th. However, the survey is actually open until the end of today. So if you have not done so, this is an opportunity to fill out the survey. We need as much input from the community, particularly the historic community, as possible. And please encourage, if you have not done so, to encourage others to help fill out that survey. And thank you. That is all I have for staff reports.
Okay, thank you, Sharice. Anyone have any questions for Sharice? I'm sorry, I had one thing I wanted to ask you. I was trying to make notes as you were talking. You said the Wills, oh no, the event out in Bluffton. Which event is this?
The Center for Heirs Property Preservation, I'm helping Bluffton share, share that event. This is the heirs property seminar that you usually listen to on a yearly basis, but they're having it out in Bluffton. And so I can resend the flyer, but they need 25 participants in order for the event to go on.
Yeah,
So
that's what I wanted to ask you about. You had mentioned that. Do you know
Yeah.
how many they have so far?
I don't, but that is a good question. I'm happy to reach out to see if they need more people to sign up. Because also on the flyer, it says sign up as soon as possible because spots are limited. So,
And those flyers have been circulated out throughout the island and Bluffton?
yes.
Okay. All right. Just making note of that. All right, that's all I have. Anyone else have any other questions or comments? Well, if there are none, I find that the next item on our agenda is adjourned. But thank you all for your time. Again, thank the members of Town Council who were present, and of course our public. And thank Dr. DeBose and her staff for putting these items together and continuing the good work we're doing. I think we're moving in a good direction, and we're always anxious to hear just how we're doing and what areas might need attention. So I know Dr. Bose will continue to work on that. Again, if there are no other questions or comments, we find ourselves adjourned. Thank you all and have a great day.